Senator Simon Babula, now you have the floor. Former minister, sorry, thank you, leader, for reminding me, former minister. You have the floor to move the motion for your bill to be read the second time.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I also thank my distinguished colleagues for giving me this privilege. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, Simon Lalong, representing the good people of Plateau South. I rise to move to lead the debate on the National Council for the Traditional Rulers Establishment Bill.
Can go on.
Thank you once again, Mr. President. Mr. President, respected colleagues, please permit me to lead the debate on the general principles on the bill to establish the National Council for Traditional Rulers in Nigeria. This bill seeks to establish the National Council for Traditional Rulers in order to accord formal recognition to as well facilitate the important roles and functions of our traditional rulers. This bill was read for the first time in this chamber on Tuesday, the 8th October 2024. Mr. President, my respected colleagues, you recall that before the amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorates and the colony of Lagos to form Nigeria in 1914 by the British colonial masters, various areas were conglomeration of kingdoms, caliphates, chiefdoms, and empires existing through natural indigenous forms of governance. The traditional authorities were very influential because they governed their societies by virtue of their being the custodians of people's culture, tradition, values, morals, and religious beliefs, etc. They serve as vanguards in handling and containing communal conflicts, crises, and insecurities among their diverse citizens. They also brokered and regulated commerce and industry through trade with other kingdoms. The glory of traditional rulers blossomed between the 1910s and the 1960s, where Nigerian traditional rulers were very influential and in charge of native authority administration under the British colonial indirect rule system. They serve as the executive of the of the council, the legislature, making bylaws, and the judiciary in charge of native authority, police, judges, and prisons. This format continued until the First Republic, 1960 to 1966, with the role of traditional rulers as members of the regional houses of chiefs. The traditional institution was, however, sidelined with General Ironsi's 1966 unitary government, General Gowon's and General Obasanjo's 1967 and 1976 local government reform decrees that stripped traditional rulers of the powers and shared them between federal, state, and local governments. While the 1979 Constitution restored the significance of our traditional institutions to a great extent, the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as amended, relegated their relevance to the background. That's why we're having insecurity everywhere without control today. In summary, while there are no constitutional rules for our traditional rulers, there is also concurrently no law that provides the framework for our traditional rulers to operate despite their importance to the society. It is in this order to fill the current lacuna that I first of all sponsored a Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999 Alteration Bill, SB 532, which was read in this chamber on Thursday, the 24th of September 2024. It is also in furtherance of the above that this bill, the National Council of Traditional Rulers of Nigeria Establishment Bill 2024, seeks to provide framework for the traditional rulers to operate at the federal level and contribute their quota if they are captured within the Constitution, for national stability and development as they did in 1910s and 1960s. I know a lot of people were not born. Many of us were not born. But we read history and we saw the importance and relevance. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, it is my conviction that even in these contemporary times, traditional rulers play a key role in the non-kinetic approach of the efforts by government at all levels to tackle our security challenges because they are ingrained in the fabrics of our societies. In conclusion, I urge you all to support this bill for second reading and eventual passage into law in order to spur better synergy between traditional rulers and government. Thank you, Mr. President.
Distinguished,
and thanks for the opportunity to make my contribution to this. But let me stand by supporting the bill as read by my very good friend, Excellency. Mr. President, do I go on to make my contribution then?
you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, this is a very important bill. I certainly support it wholeheartedly. I've always felt that traditional institutions must have a defined role within the Constitution, and this is what this bill seeks to achieve. I am aware historically that in the 50s we had a House of Chiefs in Ibadan, and I'm sure there's another one in Kaduna where they played very important roles in the society. As a matter of fact, Mr. President and my colleagues, I was told that the House of Chiefs in Ibadan and the rest of them played a significant role in discussing and negotiating our independence, what later became Nigeria in 1960. So I was taken aback, actually, when I now found out eventually that they were sidelined. There are no more roles for them. But I know from my own background that traditional institutions all over the country have a lot of role to play. I was brought up in such an environment, and I saw kings holding courts. I saw them, attending to various matters within the communities. Just let me take one instance, the issue of insecurity. In every community in Delta, the kings play a major role. They play roles with the local government chairman in issues on environment, on security. So I believe that this particular council should have a very defined role, especially when it comes to security matters. But if every king in every kingdom is made to understand that it is their duty to ensure that there is rule of law and order within their environment, there will be less crisis across the country. Secondly, Mr. President and my colleagues, I think that maybe in course of the deliberations in when the matter is referred to the committee, to the relevant committee, this council is not just to define a role for them, but there should also be some form of remuneration for them. It's not every king that might be involved in the council. It depends. I don't know the details of the bill.
Your time is off, please.
But there should
You'll
be
be
some.
speaking for 3 minutes or 4 minutes. Just 2 seconds to round up. I know you are a prince. This bill is very dear to you. I know that. So please, but you have 2 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just in summary, the kings should be given very well-defined roles in the country so that they feel a sense of belonging. It's not enough to be called kings without any official responsibilities. They want it. They want to play major roles. So I must commend you, my brother, for bringing.
Your time is off. The deputy chief, you have the floor.
Oleka Chinwa Boni, with the golden crown of a Borno senatorial zone of Ebonyi State. I rise to support this very important bill, seeking inter alia to give statutory recognition, and define rules to our traditional institutions across the country. It goes without saying, Mr. President, that our traditional rulers across the country is doing very well in terms of promoting peace and conflict resolution in our localities. But unfortunately, they lack the legal backing to so do, hence the need for this bill. I therefore support this bill in its entirety because this bill will give statutory authentication to the functions and rules of our traditional rulers across the country. I therefore call all my colleagues to back this bill. Thank you.
I know you are also a prince. That's why you are.
I am Senator Prince Wasiu Eshinokun. I rise to give my total and unalloyed support to this bill. When we cast our minds back, we will know that whatever the current form of government is doing are the roles reserved for the traditional rulers in the past. The new set of the modern day government, democratic, either it is presidential, it is parliamentary, oligarchy, and what have you, they are taking away what the traditional rulers were doing in the past. When you look, if you permit me, sir, to look at my dictionary, Google, you will see that, can I read, what are the rules for emirs in Nigeria before? The emirs control the executive, legislative, and judicial powers of the emirates. Those were before. The kings, as they were called then, also were the political, cultural, economic, and social administrators of their various emirates. Taking all of these powers away from them, leaving them with none, is not only unjust, it is antithetical to social justice. And no matter how infinitesimal rules we want to give them, I think we should give them a sense of belonging. However, there must be ways to preserve their honor, dignity, without being rubbished by the political elites.
Thank you.
That is the.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
But let me say, Senator.
And the question is very simple. We are in a democratic dispensation. Democracy has its own structure. I'm not very sure that what we are talking about is on the same line with these democratic institutions. As of today, our traditional rulers are well recognized in their local domain. They are well recognized at local government level, and they are well recognized and referred at state levels. Even at the federal level, very constantly they are called upon to solve either kinetic or non kinetic problems in Nigeria. I would just want to throw a question that we should be very, very protective of democracy and tenet of democracy. And democracy is about the people, not a section. Democracy is about electoral system, not a choice system that is common with our traditional institutions. I throw that caution so that we should be very careful. We should not be taken away by princes and princesses that are talking. Ordinary people should hear their own view too, and we should be listened to. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator,
Thank you, Mr. President of the Senate, and my very distinguished colleagues. I rise to support this motion, this bill, a debate for the inclusion of the traditional ruler in the ruling of our affairs. Now, when you look at the whole situation in Nigeria, you will find out that the Obas, let me say in the southwest, have very, very big role to play in terms of organization of the community.
They know where things are happening within the villages. They know where you can arrest situation when it is about to happen. But if they are not given the opportunity to participate in the governance, it will be very difficult for them to exhibit these unique roles. In the past, when the Obas, the Emas, and all other traditional rulers were involved in proper leadership, you find out that the rate of crimes were very low because they can narrate this situation as at when due. They have the ensures, those are the soldiers in the Yoruba land that can bring things into correction at a particular time. So with this bill, I strongly support that they should give it the opportunity to go to the next stage so that the traditional rulers can have very unique role to play in the whole system of leadership. Thank you very much.
We now have Senator Salisu Shaibu, then thereafter Senator Yaradua, and then Senator Abdullahi, and then finally Senator Muhammad Mungunu, in that order.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, Shoaib Afolabi Salisu is my name. I represent the Ogun Central Senatorial District. It is difficult to fault this motion at all, this bill, and I give just 3 reasons. Number one, as we speak, in most states of the Federation, there exists Ogun State, as an example, Ogun State Council of Traditional Rulers. I am also aware your state has. Most states of the Federation already have Council of Traditional Rulers. What is missing is the nexus of these traditional rulers to be able to come together at the national level. To further buttress this point, they are also being remunerated. They are part of the first line charge that the local government funds used to pay the traditional rulers in respective domains. In one breath, we are remunerating them. In another breath, we are not giving them any responsibility. So this is the first reason. Second reason, at every time of national crisis, we run to traditional rulers. Whenever there's a crisis in a country, the government finds a way of bringing
You are protected. You can continue.
The second reason I was mentioning was at time of grave national crisis, we run to traditional rulers on an ad hoc basis. Why don't you have a National Council of Traditional Rulers or something similar to National Council of State in a manner that they can advise government from time to time on issues of importance to our national development? Finally, Mr. President, none of us here, if your traditional ruler calls you, you run back home. None of us here, if you want to start your campaign, you go to the domain of your traditional rulers. Why do we go to them only when we are seeking votes, when we are seeking endorsement? We don't go to them as soon as we are done with the elections, we forget them. So I'm of the strong opinion that we need to have this platform for our traditional rulers to be able to meet at the national level and be able to provide for us invaluable wisdom, insight, and the closeness they enjoy with the local communities. I wholeheartedly support this bill.
I rise to support this bill and to also thank my distinguished elder, Senator Simon Lalong, for bringing this very important bill to recognize and also define rules for our traditional rulers. I just want to buttress what most of my distinguished colleagues have said. One, in terms of the security, if we go to the local governments today, The number of police you find in the local governments are not more than 60. If you go to the wards, down to the wards, you hardly find a policeman or a security Department of State Security Service. You just find maybe one person from the State Security Service running around almost 3 local governments. But if you go to if we look at the traditional rulers, they have such an architecture from the district head to ward heads, whereby even if a village constitutes very few houses, you find the presence of our traditional rulers there. So recognizing them and giving them rules.
You have 1 second remaining.
1 minute, sir. Would help in ensuring that they help government, especially on the aspect of security. We know how well respected they are in the society, very close to the masses. And like my brother mentioned here, my distinguished colleague, when we go out for campaigns, our first port of call is the traditional ruler. We go there and seek for his support to talk to the people for us to win the elections. And after the elections, what do we do? So I think...
Thank you very much. Thank you. Senator...
Thank you, Mr. President.
Former leaders of the Assembly.
I would like to start, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, by first of all paying my tribute to distinguished Senator Governor Lalong for bringing this issue in this session of the Senate. Like Senator Salisu and Yaradua have pointed out very clearly, Mr. President, that the traditional rulers in this country have governance structures that stretch right down to the very heart of the smallest village and individuals that populate this country. Apart from being the people who look after their populations and custodians of our culture and traditions, they also have and play a very, very important role in securing the people of this country. I think there is no state here that does not depend on them on one issue or other when it comes to the issue of conflict resolution or issues that involve popular participation in anything having to do with political, cultural, or social affairs. Mr. President, like Salisu and several others who have contributed to this bill have said, we ourselves, there is none of us here who can say that he has participated and actually started his political campaigns without making nocturnal and often visits to the palaces of these traditional rulers. And let us also be very, very candid about some of these issues. This democracy we are talking about has its foundation from traditional institutions. It's not true that democracy is totally outside the confines of traditional institutions and management. The source of the democratic culture that we enjoy around the world today, Great Britain, is still ruled, at least nominally, by a traditional ruler. There are so many cultures where democracy has thrived, but where traditional institutions are recognized and given prominence or place. Mr. President, you can remember that in the 9th Senate, we had a meeting of all the traditional rulers in this country, and they made a nomination and wrote a memo to the National Assembly regarding a place for them in the Nigerian Constitution. And that was done. We went to the thing, and it came back to this chamber
And it is at this point, or in the House of Representatives, that that particular amendment failed to sail through from the National Assembly. Therefore, while congratulating Senator Lelong for this very important bill that he has brought, I think it's also important to remind him that this issue has to be taken care of in another exercise of constitutional amendment, so we'll try to find a place for that institution, and also to ask him to use his very, very enormous weight and political clout to ensure that when the issue finally comes before this chamber, we gather enough votes to allow it to sail through as a constitutional amendment. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. My right.
I represent Borno North Senatorial District. Mr. President, this bill is res ipsa locutor. It speaks for itself. What this bill merely seeks to achieve is to insulate the traditional rulers from the whims and caprices of executive fiat, whereby the executive will just wake up one day and decide not to recognize this Council of Traditional Rulers. So it's merely seeking to insulate them from the whims and caprices of executive fiat and further give them the legal backing so that they can only not back, but they can bite in discharge of their functions, so that they cannot be reduced to a toothless bulldog that can bark but cannot bite. So this bill merely seeks to give legal backing for something that already exists at the national level. For example, I know the Shogo of Borno, who is my traditional ruler, represents my state in the Council of Traditional Rulers, and I know the Emir of Ilorin represents Kwara State in the National Council of Traditional Rulers. I don't know of Ikiti, but I know of Kwara, of Kano. Though in Kano there is controversy now, but I know the Emir of Kano, whichever one. Emir of Kano, whichever one that will represent Kano in the National Council of Traditional Rulers. Thank you. I support the second reading of this bill.
Is it coming as a bill or is coming as a motion? So debate for the second. Well, I think the issue is very clear. If there is nobody here that will be opposed to this, otherwise you won't go home and you will not be received by a traditional ruler. I think it's also important that we give them this authority for them to be able to contribute to the security of their domains. Just like we have to reinforce the governors to really act the part of chief security officers of their various states. So if we complement this with a proper recognition of our traditional institution, my opinion is that the security of the nation will be more assured. So let me recognize Vice Senator Olare to round up the debate.
Thank you very much. Well, just to add once more impetus to the fair discussion people have given in support of this bill. You know, at the local government level, as a former chairman of local government in my state for 7 years, the institution of the traditional life is well entrenched at local government level, and they have headship at each local government. I think ditto for all the states. I think that is why the mover of this bill, a former governor, is open that the missing link is at the national level. And if you look at the trend now, the current traditional rulers are very, very experienced, well lettered professionals. So we need people like that at the national level. in an organized legal body so that they can be a source of communication between the national and their subject at home. I think it's going to add a lot of good to the governance at the national level if you have a formal body for them in Nigeria. It will assist us a lot. Thank you very much.
Well, historically and trajectorily, you remember before 1648 or the key of the Westphalia Act, the Peace of Westphalia, where the state got authority, who was in charge? Traditional rulers. From the Pope, Your Excellency, President, you are even aware of the civil war in England. What led to the civil war where tens of millions of people were killed? Conflict of authority between the Pope and the traditional rulers. The King of Scotland said there is nobody to exercise authority over the state of Scotland except himself. But this popular authority of the kings were lost in 1648 when we have the sovereignty of the Westphalia Act. It is then that Nigeria start to copy from that historical trajectory and be cautious of the role of traditional rulers. The draconian way of laws being made, and the multiplicity and multifarious duplication of traditional institutions, again, is too porous, so that laws cannot guide them. Mr. President, I will conclude by saying that even in my jurisdiction, we have almost 71 ologias and about 50 urbans in a small town. How do you now dedicate and disseminate power to them? Why this is a very fantastic adventure of a bill brought by our learned senator, from Plateau. We need to be on cautious side. You give traditional ruler too much authority, they overtake the states. And it is also the case that traditional rulers are not even interested in respecting simple directive from the state authority. For example, don't travel out of your state jurisdiction without permission from you have been governor, Your Excellency, for several years, almost a decade. You know what you went through. You will make a simple law for traditional rulers to take permission so that you can be accountable for whatever happened to them when they travel outside the state jurisdiction. They refuse to obey you. And by the time you complain, they have to lean down and talk to them and prostrate. These are not in tendium with contemporary behavior of the modern times. While we don't completely say, Mr. Senate President, with due respect to your person and distinguished senator, I stand to say very clearly that we should be on the cautious side, divinely clearly, without any ambiguity, if any rule is to be given to them. Lastly, how do we send revenue? The fiscal policy of the federalism requires a lot of details. And how do you cross the I's and dot the T's? The state still responsible for the funding of traditional institutions. I will say the federal government should disburse money to them directly. We will tell all of these are happening, but I don't want to refer Your Excellency to conflicting conflicts or converging complexities around the stillment of functions and roles of traditional ruler. But this Senate, this very brilliant Senate, very intelligent Senate, headed by a common Senate President, should be conscious in ensuring that the law, the stillment, cover all this area of conflict.
There's a point of order on your allusion to 1648.
Yes, 1648.
Mr. President,
the tools of Westphalia, where the Senate President
point of order.
Thank you.
1648.
Mr. President. Order 52.3.4. A senator must confine his observations to the subjects under discussion and may not introduce matter irrelevant thereto. Mr. President, I want to draw the attention of my distinguished colleagues that what he's talking about or referring to our traditional rulers, what he's saying they are doing, or what is alluding to their behavior or to their art is not correct. And this bill is talking about giving them prominence or giving them relevance in the scheme of things in our country. But he has gone off track, saying you have to prostrate. In my own judicial, we don't prostrate for traditional rulers. We don't do that. We take them as the custodian of our tradition, or as the custodian of our culture. And any society without history, you cannot change history.
So
I am saying now,
Deputy Senate President, are you from Nigeria?
I'm from Nigeria.
And you say you don't prostrate for your emirs.
It's against our, we bow. We pay, yes, we respect them. But there are good things. There are very, very good things about our traditional institution. And it's bringing the laws or the traditions of other of foreign jurisdiction to our country. What he's talking about is about England, not about Nigeria. So he has gone off track.
No, point of correction, sir.
So we want relevance for our traditional institution in this country. So that's why we're supporting this bill.
Well, your point of order is not. Let me say that we can sit down to discuss the pros and cons. But what we should do at this stage of this bill is to discuss the general principles of the bill. We shouldn't go into the nitty-gritty of how we respect them, whether we should pay obeisance by prostrating or by bowing or by kneeling. But I think one of the problems why security broke down in Nigeria totally is the lack of recognition of the traditional institution in the Constitution of 1999 as amended. And I'm sure even the distinguished Senator Lalong knows that this will pass this chamber and pass the other chamber and go to the state houses to assemblies. Because outside the public hearing, it will require constitutional amendment to be able to effect this. So we are just starting a long haul, and all these issues will be discussed, canvassed, and by various arms of government at the state level, at the public hearing and all that before we can bring it into reality. But I think it's better we start by pointing out that we need to give stronger rules to our traditional rulers and strong recognition for them. I'm just aligning myself. But let me put the question. Those in support that this bill be read a second time say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Therefore, I want to invite the clerk of the Senate to proceed to read the bill for a second time. Distinguished colleagues, a bill for an act to establish the National Council for Traditional Rulers in order to accord formal recognition as well as facilitate their roles and functions, and for other related matters 2025, second reading taken. Distinguished colleagues, a bill for an act to establish the National Council for Traditional Rulers in order to accord formal recognition as well as facilitate their roles and functions, and for other related matters, second reading taken and committed to the Committee on Establishment and Public Service Matters to report to the Senate in 6 weeks. So let me thank the distinguished Senator Lalong for sponsoring this bill, and especially thank the Deputy Senate President for his role in mediating and meandering through the various contributions of our colleagues, and further thank our colleagues for their contributions, and all that when eventually the bill goes for public hearing, you should also make yourselves available to contribute your views, so that at the end we may end up with a very clear and concise legislation that will spell out the roles and functions of traditional institutions in the affairs of governance in Nigeria to avoid conflicts between the democratically elected governments and the traditional institutions that lie forever and exist beyond the various traditional leaderships in almost all parts of the country. As Senator Jibe Ibrahim pointed out, the bill will also have to eliminate multiplicity, where, for instance, you have over 70-something traditional rulers in a state with just 18 local governments. They all cannot belong to one council. Because if we have 774 local governments in the country, and one local government has over 10 traditional institutions of equal standing, it simply means you may end up with over 7,000 people in a room. The cacophony of voices may tend to drown national discourse and elicit more confusion in governance than would have been required. So we will have to streamline the membership of the National Council of Traditional Rulers when eventually it comes to clause-by-clause considerations. So I thank all my colleagues for this.